Uh, she can tell us like no other what it's like to work in a country where it's very dangerous to and even can cost your life to work as a journalist. She gave up her job as a journalist, and she founded a organization, Periodistas da Pie, to give journalists trainings in freedom and to help to raise awareness for the situation. Elia, can you come here and tell your story, please?
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to Free Press Unlimited for the invitation. You have to be patient with my English because it's not good enough, but I'm trying to do my best just to explain what is happening in Mexico. And it's very, very complicated to speak about that. Maybe because there's a lot of journalists who have to be here. Lots of heroes in my country. To start, I would like to thank you for this invitation. I'm always surprised when people, in this case Free Press Unlimited, for example, think of me to share my experience as a journalist or activist for freedom of speech. Actually, I am only one of many, many Mexican journalists who work hard to improve the quality of our coverage and defending our right to inform the people and the public, and the right to the public to be informed in our country. Nowadays, trying to make sure we can work under safe conditions. As you know, these are troubled and violent times for Mexicans. Since 2000, between 65, 70 journalists have been killed in our country. We don't even know exactly how many casualties there have been. The last victim was Regina Martinez, who was murdered last weekend, and I would like to dedicate this speech to her. She was a friend of us, of our organization, so it was very hard to hear about her in this forum. The organizers of today's event invited me to share a personal story, my own story, an incident that transcends of mere anecdote, and my story could be interesting, even exciting, if it wasn't so very similar to the very day and extraordinary stories of dozens of journalists working in Mexico. In fact, that is a major concern about the present developments in Mexico, that the violence has become so pervasive, so widespread, that it no longer fills out the ordinary. Unfortunately, this doesn't not only apply to journalists. Allow me to tell you the following story. 18 years ago, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation rose up against the government in Chiapas, Mexico's southernmost state, on the border with Guatemala. Most people remember the emblematic figure of Subcomandante Marcos. As a rebellion, the uprising in Chiapas had a unique character. However, in the early days, it was as violent as any confrontation of this kind. The news media were on the spot almost from day one, surprising even the Mexican government and the army. The authorities were unable to shut down the restricted newscast for at least the first couple of weeks. In fact, maybe they would never manage to do so while confronted with such an effective communication strategy of the Zapatistas. Well, then one of the most serious incidents involving the news media took place in Chiapas. A convoy of journalists broke through the military cordon, and their route became a clear target for attacks by army helicopters, and there were 2 or 3 cars that were unaware that they were following each other. I was traveling in one such a vehicle, a clearly labeled van, with the EFE correspondent and television crew from the Telemundo TV and freelance photographer. We were driving towards an indigenous community that, according to our information, was under attack by the army. On the way on this village, we were suddenly involved in a hail of bullets from military helicopters hovering our convoy. At first, we thought it was a mistake, but the attack continued, and they then started dropping a kind of small bombs that set fire on surrounding area. The army later claimed our convoy was attacked by mistake, and then, in obvious contradiction to this statement, they said it was not such a big deal anyway, and that the journalists had been irresponsible to stuck their noses in the wrong place. The attack had affected us in a number of ways. We had not only feared for our lives, we were also enraged by our helplessness against brute force and weaponry. After this, nothing. A number of stories were published, but there were no official complaints. Questions were raised in the newspapers and on the radio and TV, but the government never officially recognized the news media right to be there to inform. There was never even an official apology for the incident. This was 18 years ago, and even though we believed things would get better, the situation has not really improved since that time. The thing is, in Mexico, there's a kind of official arena where the media and those in power meet. Our radio and television newscast in this arena, one of the journalists asks a question and a government representative answers it. In the next interview, the journalist asks the same question to another representative, and this representative answers it, and so on and so on. The official way to do the news. Because we have these opportunities for action, many people live in the belief that Mexico has a robust and democratic press. But this is simply not true. Investigative journalism is practiced only sparingly. Our best storytellers are currently confined to the editorial section, since they have no opportunity to do their work in the news sections. And then there is all the other stuff that puts further pressure on our sector, such as change of our business model, the multimedia transition, etc. Journalists in our country work under difficult conditions. While up to now, I have referred to the Mexican media in general. Things are actually a great deal worse in our states. In this small province, journalists are murdered in the full view of the authorities, who basically continue to view the news media with intolerance, distrust, and annoyance. In that respect, nothing much has changed, be it in 18 years ago, 40 years ago, or yesterday. And we have two figures and a statistic from Freedom of Speech organization, which provide concrete evidence for the number of attacks of journalists by authorities. The silence is gradually spreading across Mexico. Starting in Tamaulipas and now in Veracruz, journalists have fled the area and remain silent about local wrongdoing. At best, they find some way to publish and share their story with the outside world. In the network Periodistas de a Pie, we collect the stories of journalists from Veracruz. We are required to promise them anonymity because otherwise they are too afraid to step forward. And they have been proven right. Only recently, Regina Martinez, a correspondent from Veracruz, was the latest casualty. In Mexico City, we journalists know that there are places that you can no longer visit without strict security protocols. We have been forced to remain silent about the kidnappings and raids to our colleagues, because we never know whether publishing our own reports would only make matters worse. And finally, an increasing number of female journalists work under the threat of intimidation, attacks to their person, and now murder. A strong sense of fear is seeping into our profession, one that affects both our mood and our pens. Mexican journalists today is an extensive compilation of anecdotes about violence in a climate of corruption. For most journalists, the day passes in terms of simple maths. One has to add up the sums of the murdered and the injured and the execute, the civilian casualties, the drug traffickers, the police officer, the military soldiers killed in confrontation or ambushed, the forcible disappear, and this tally, however, the numbers of journalist victims are not particularly taken into account. Journalists in Mexico have been assassinated, kidnapped, or held captive for a few hours, a few days, or even months. Some return, and we are still looking in vain for others. Almost nothing is known about the journalists who have been murdered, disappeared, or kidnapped. Files about them accumulate in negligent government drawers, and their cases are slowly forgotten because journalists in Mexico have to take responsibility for their own fate and security.